Hello, everyone, and welcome to Coaching Kristy only on deucescrack.com. This is Andrew Beluga Whale Sideman with the wonderful Kristy Arnett. Hello.
Hey.
Hi. Um, Kristy, you're back in the US now, right?
Yes,
Me too. And
and
isn't it nice?
very.
It is. I can't
The
even.
first thing I,
Yeah, go ahead.
I was just gonna say the first thing I said when I got on the phone was, "Wow, you sound normal.
Yeah,
I can hear
no
you."
kidding. It is very nice to be in a nice, comfortable home with without random people speaking Chinese next to me. And I'm sure you guys appreciate it too. And that's actually I wanted to say I saw some of the comments there were some people being like like I'm sorry, but Chrissy's way too loud and Andrew's too quiet and blah 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 and it's and you know it's distracting and yeah I'm sorry it's very difficult to make a video when one person's in Paris and the person's in Hong Kong. Now that we're back in the comforts of the beautiful US of A, hopefully the quality will be up to you guys justifiably high standards. Um, so the last time we had a session, you got
Sad.
crushed
Yeah.
and there were, first of all, I want to sort of say thanks to the Jesus Christ group. You guys are incredibly supportive. Um,
Yeah.
there are a bunch of people there basically being like, hey, don't worry about it. We all have done it. And I think that's something that I said last week too, which was like, everyone, when they move up limits, does this. There
Mhm.
is no one who has just moved up limits and been like, oh, yeah, I win. It doesn't happen like that. And if it does happen,
We.
eventually they keep on moving up limits, and eventually they hit a spot where it doesn't.
Yeah.
So like for me, for example, 50 cent $1 for me was uh, I flew through it on my way to 1-2, and then
Mhm.
1-2 I lost a ton of money. And then eventually I broke through to 1-2, and then 2-4 was easy, so I broke up to 3-6, and then I got crushed. You know what I mean? And it's the kind of
Yeah.
thing where everyone goes through this, so it's something that's very identifiable with all poker players. Um, and the good thing is that I hopefully will be able to learn from it and show some control when we start doing some crazy stuff, as to either being like I'm not going to play now, or what am I doing? I'm doing crazy stuff. It actually I was looking back through all the different videos, and one of the episode one we talked about this idea of having a process. You know what I'm talking about? And all the
Mhm.
way back to our coaching sessions that we did, in Vegas, we talked about having this process. Very methodical, very one at a time. If this, then that. If not this, then that. It's move through the problems one at a time. Um, just like we might do with our math homework, in high school or something like that. Just break it all down into little easy pieces and try to do them all at once, or one at a time, as opposed to looking at a big problem and doing it all at once. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
You wouldn't like that's actually a really good metaphor. I've never thought about this before, but if you were presented a very difficult math problem that involved a lot of deduction, a lot of calculation, stuff like that, you wouldn't be able to just look at it and do it. You know what I mean?
Right.
You have a process. You do the things you know how to do, and you try to isolate the things that you're not sure how to do yet. So when we're like 3 years old, or not 3 years, but like I don't know, 5 or 6, something like that, we start learning, the very basic maths. You know what I mean? So we learn how to
Mhm.
add and subtract, and then eventually we learn how to multiply and divide. So when we actually start to do like a very difficult high-end math problem, those are based upon the fact that we know those things easily. You know, if the problem is what is 64 divided by 8, we will know the answer is 8. You know what I mean? We have no, I think it's 8, right? I got that one right, didn't I?
Yes.
We have no we have no problem with that because that's like easy. When someone says, what is the third derivative of some three variable equation or something like that, um, it's very, very difficult to just look at that and know what to do. But to take it to then break it down into one at a time. Well, like what does a first derivative mean? Well, we just take this number and make it that, and we becomes basically addition and subtraction, or multiplication. And so, but if we can't do it if we just try to do it all at once. And I think that when you move to higher stakes, there's a temptation to fall back upon what like we fall trying to solve the big problem all at once because our mind shuts down. Emotions
Mhm.
cause us to want to like look at the problem and know what to do immediately. But when we actually like become good problem solvers, we just look at a problem and take it one step at a time. You know, all of these hands that we had trouble with last week, or I guess that would be like 2 weeks ago now. Or I guess no, it's 2 days ago. They released like 2 or 3 days ago. Anyway, in episode 7, um, a lot of the problems we had were just because we just stopped thinking. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? And just think about it like a math problem. You would never look at a math problem and try to solve it all at once. It's just like, or for those of you guys who aren't math people, but let's say philosophy people. I don't know. What did you study in college, Christy? What was your study?
Communications and journalism.
That's gonna be a tough one to work into this.
Yeah.
But so for those of you guys who maybe aren't good with, let's say, numbers, like I don't think I'm great with numbers. Um, Philosophy is the exact same way. You get posed a very difficult philosophical problem, right? Like a train is heading towards people, and you can one side is like a grandma, and the other side is like a criminal. Which side, and you can choose. You have to kill one of them. Who do you choose and why? These same problems, which are incredibly difficult to actually cope with, um, especially if you're emotional about them, can actually be solved if you break it down one step at a time. Well, if I choose the grandma, this is what that means, one thing at a time. If I choose the criminal, this is what that means, one thing at a time. And you can actually answer these questions by using deduction, slow, methodized deduction. And that's what we're going to try to do. We need to be really focused on making sure that that's our mindset going into like a higher stakes game, and not sort
Mhm.
of like I'm playing for the rush. There will be a rush, but that's not the reason why you're playing. And that's like, we need to be just very very comfortable with the things that we know how to do. And you know how to bet
Mhm.
for value. You know how to evaluate your fold equity. You know these things. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And and oftentimes even the mistakes. There's one here where we check raised with nothing and then continued betting big with nothing or something like that, um, with no equity. And it's one of those things where it's actually just like a perverse, emotionalized version of what we know. You looked at that. I think you had like a pocket pair on a low board and you check raised it. Um, and like pocket three, something I remember exactly. But the point is that what you did is you said, "Oh, I've got no fold equity, which means or I've got no equity, which means my hand is raise or fold," which isn't exactly right in that situation, but it's like applicable to some spots. And you raise, and then the guy calls, and you're like, "Oh, well, now the turn card increased my fold equity, I guess," right? So, but you're still like kind of going through it, but it's basically bastardized. So this time
Mhm.
we're gonna go through it and be like able to justify our things better and better and better as we go. So why don't you roll the tape now
Mhm.
that I've started off with like a 10-minute rant at the beginning of this, but um, and we'll see some hands. How'd you feel about the session in general?
I felt a lot better. I felt pretty confident going in, especially after, the first session not going so well. I took, some time, grinded 25, 50 cent, then played 50 cent a dollar, felt good at that. Watched a few more Deuce Cracked videos, got my mind right, and started playing. So felt felt good going into it. And I think we see some action like as soon as I sat down and um I made sure that my mind was ready to be able to if I had to play big pots.
Hmm.
Um and I mean I just sat down and I obviously only played a few hands, but um immediately swipes fill. I saw him playing a bunch of other tables and I was trying to sit down.
Hmm.
Um so I thought this was just, kind of a standard spot to just shove.
Definitely, definitely. In fact, I'm loving it right now. Especially since someone knows who you are, you know what I mean? Or at least if someone like this guy's obviously a regular, he probably at least there's a decent chance he knows about this series and he knows about you and all this stuff, and he knows that your reputation now after working with me is to raise everything. You know what I mean? And so, and this is like so beautiful with the ace queen suited there. I'm just gonna re-raise now, and I'll probably be able to get it in, kind of comfortably. Especially given that there's a fish on the button that we can re-raise for value. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Um, and so, no, I think.
So
Go ahead, yeah.
sizing though, in a spot like this,
I think that's way too big.
okay. All
I
right.
mean, let's see here. Normally, if someone raised a 10, we might make it like 26, and now we're making it 38 because there's a caller. You know what I mean? I would make it maybe, geez, 30, 32, something like that. You know what I
Okay.
mean?
Okay.
Um,
Mhm.
I just think I mean, you can't really go wrong because there's a fish in there, and we have a lot of like, already like a good history with this Swipesville guy. Um,
Mhm.
Could you go back for just a second? I want to see what happened with the ace jack hand on the
Yeah.
right. Um, some people also in the comments were talking about your you double barreled that turn. Seems like a great spot
Yeah.
to double barrel. I really like it. Obviously, the 10 doesn't necessarily increase our full equity that much, but
Yeah, that's what I was gonna
we do have
ask.
some good pot equity. It's really unlikely he has a 9. You know what I mean? Just because there's
Mhm.
not that many nines left. Um, and so the most dangerous thing we're worried about here really is a hand like 7-8 or 10-8, right?
Mhm.
But even then,
Mhm.
this actually makes this a pretty good spot to three barrel.
Okay.
Because remember we talked about three barreling as being a spot where, we want to three barrel in a spot where someone has some calls on the turn with equity hoping to spike, and then when they don't, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that would be like
Yeah.
if somebody here had 7-8, they'd probably peel this turn, but then if the river card was a queen and we fire out again, there's no way they're calling on the river with 7-8. You know what I mean? Even if the
Mhm.
river card was like a 3, they're probably not calling on the river with 7-8. And so it's a great spot for us to think about three barreling. So like it's a great spot for us to two barrel as well. One thing I also tell people is that it's usually not a good idea to three barrel, to plan on two barreling when it's a bad spot, when it would be a good spot to three barrel. Like for example, if instead of that being a 10, it was a 6, right?
Mhm.
It's clearly not as good of a spot for us to do two barrel. You know what I mean?
Okay.
Because we don't have the
Okay.
straight draw, our equity's diminished, etc. Um, but so then you might be able to say, well, you could still three barrel profitably because you said the circumstances for three barreling are the same, right? If he calls on the turn, he likely has a hand like 7-8 or something like that. You know what I mean? A
Mhm.
pair and a straight draw or something along those lines. Um, and that's that's true, but because it's not a great spot to two barrel, because we don't win often enough when we get called, it's still probably not a good spot to just go ahead and two barrel and plan on three barreling. So I would only three barrel after it was already a good idea to two barrel. Does that
Okay.
make sense?
Yeah, yeah, that does make sense. And I was when this hand came up and like in the turn came, I was thinking, well, obviously my pot equity has increased and it's like, it's an
Hmm.
overcard, but it's so close to the cards that are on the flop that I didn't know
Yeah,
if,
which is why it's not a card that I would say really increases our fold equity. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? But it does increase our pot equity, and our fold equity probably is still good enough to make it work. You know what I
Okay.
mean? If we had ace queen
Yeah.
instead of ace jack, then it might not be a good spot to bet.
Mhm.
Okay.
Okay. Okay.
Let's see what happens when we pick up more hands. We pick up a lot of hands right in a row here. It's kind of cool. Because we get queen 10, I think we have ace or 10-9 suit over there. So clearly over here with this, we should even be raising bigger than that with the queen 10. You know what I mean?
Okay.
Like this is as we move up in stakes, the presence of a fish, especially one with 60, 70 big blinds, something like that, um, is great. And we need to really emphasize trying to take the single fish's money. Now, we also need to be aware, because what look like right here on the left is that we have two regulars, it looks like, on our left. Aggressive people who are capable of three betting and four betting us and stuff like that, right?
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
and I think you're going to fold that 9-10 suited, right?
Yeah.
Good. Good, good. Well, a lot of people when they get into this, I'm playing higher stakes and I'm gonna play like a bad aggressive fish. they they see a hand like that and they're like, it's a great time to make a move. Like I know I'm not supposed to do it, but I think it's a good idea and blah blah. And it's not. You know what I mean? You know
Yeah.
offhand that it's not, but people do it anyway. So that's good. Good to see you showing some discipline. Um, but no, I mean the only thing we're gonna have to be careful about now is people like as they get more aggressive and as they get better, will take a more aggressive stance in terms of not letting you isolate Litor.
Mhm.
Um, and that's like to be expected as you go up. But the ways you deal with it are just the same as they would anyway against someone who's a light three better. And you're in position, you defend a little lighter. When you're out of position, you four bet and get it in with a wider range. You know what I mean?
Okay.
You start to be there starts to become a point where in certain situations you'll never fold a pair pre-flop.
Okay.
You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Like if you raise pocket threes and this Lars Der Chund guy, and especially if you're isolating this guy and this Lars Der Chund guy four bets or three bets rather, think about it. His three betting range there has got to be super polarized if he's any good. Because if he had anything other than the nuts or air, he'd want to play with the fish.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? And that the problem with
Mhm.
that is when his three betting range gets super polarized, there's not that much nuts. It's way more easy to have air than the nuts. So it
Mhm.
just becomes his range becomes really unbalanced because he doesn't have as many things that he would get it in with because some of them he would call to play with the fish. Like give him a hand like pocket nines. You know what I mean? He's way more likely to call with nines to play against Litor than he is to try to isolate himself with you.
So then if I have, pocket
hmm
threes and then he three
hmm
bets and I four bet and he shoves, like then isn't his range leaning then more
Oh,
towards
once
the
he
nuts?
shoves, sure. That's obviously not what we're hoping for with pocket three.
Well, of course. So then, I mean,
But
am
if you
I
actually look at your equity, given the money in the pot versus his
okay?
range, especially if we think that he might call preflop with a hand like nines and tens. What if he calls with preflop with a hand like jacks? Right? We
Mhm.
might be looking at a range that's like queens, kings, aces, ace, king, and you find that like ace, king is of all those hands that has the most combinations, is the most likely, right?
Okay. Uh-huh.
And so we're actually like basically priced in once the four bet goes down to call with any pair preflop to a shove.
Okay.
Um, and it
Yeah.
basically stays that way when someone starts, three betting and five betting their smaller pairs because they also start three betting and five betting hands like ace queen and ace jack. You know what I mean? And
Mhm.
getting them in with those too. And so it's like, they're. I'm not saying by the way for everyone who's listening that this is like, hey, everyone should get all their pairs in every single time. I'm
Yeah.
saying that right now,
Yeah.
given the table dynamic situation on the left, we're on the left of some fish and we're on the right of some regulars,
Mhm.
right? If the regulars are decent, they'll try to not let us just abuse the fact that we have close to the God seat here. This alpha rich guy on the left, he has the God seat, what I like to call the God seat, which is all the money flows left to right, and it's going to flow right into alpha rich.
Mhm.
But the next person in line is you,
Mhm.
and so you have a great seat on that table. But obviously, these two regulars on your left are going to try to do a good job of uh, getting you to like not use that. You know what I mean? They're going to try to like prevent you from isolating. They're going to try to play a lot of pots against you, and that's fine. And I think here we're just going to try to value bet this guy till he dies, right?
Yeah.
Um, which looks good to me. Um, yeah, I don't really care what bet size you use here. Basically, this is I would say like whatever size you think you can get called with. I mean, I don't think he's going to fold any ace, let alone even a hand like king 10. So, um, I think uh, I think you can just go ahead and keep on firing away. Um, but what I was saying over there on the left is, a lot of players worry about, what am I going to do against these regulars who are going to prevent me from doing my thing. And the truth is, like, you just have to get more aggressive into them. You can't let them. If they're going to get lighter, you got to get lighter. You know what
Mhm.
I mean?
Mhm.
And so that's fine. By the way, it's totally fine for us to get involved in a huge pissing contest with these guys on the left, provided that we're still going after the fish. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
What we can't do, and
Yeah.
what a lot of players might do, is they might take their queen nine suited from mid position or something like that, and be like, oh well, I can't raise here to isolate this fish because these guys play back at me so much, right? What we need to do is we need to say like, well, I've got ace jack here, and if these guys are playing back at me enough, then I'm gonna play back at them with this sort of thing, right? Because
Yeah.
it's way worse for us if we just give in and let them start isolating the fish themselves. You know what I mean?
Okay.
It's way
Yeah.
better for us to just start battling and but then there's an important thing here. It's not a good idea to battle over nothing. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like let's say there's not a fish we're isolating, right? And the guy on our left, like let's say there's a regular immediately on our left and then another fish on his left, right? So we're not really. Can you hear me okay? Are you there? Sorry.
Yeah. Yeah.
We're not really like raising to isolate anyone. We just have a hand that we're raising. Like, let's say we have like ace 10. You know what I mean? Ace 10 in mid position, and we raise. And this guy to our left three bets us. To four bet and play back at him there is really with no real strong purpose. You
Right.
know what I mean? It's just because
Mhm.
like oh, this guy's probably messing with me. The truth is that it's best to not fight and get involved in these huge things for no reason. When there's a good reason to, then we should be a total brawler. See what I'm saying?
Yeah, for sure.
And you see sort of this left hand, you can see sort of what I'm talking about this alpha rich guy who's getting, more opportunities to take money from the two guys on his right. You know what I mean? He
Hmm.
almost sacked this J.R. Smith guy because, he's just going to get more opportunities. And you can see even there, like he should have, if he's good, he should have had like do seven offsuit there because there were two fish limping and he folded the button. You know what I mean? Like if we were in that situation on the button with the two fish on our right, we would be isolating, this huge range because we're just so excited to play every pot we can. But here's an option. Let's say we have 4-6 suited there and there's those two fish limping. What do you think we should do on the button?
Limp?
Yeah.
Well, okay.
Well, but tell me why though.
Well, because they can't raise for value. I mean, they're probably going to call any raise
Mm-hmm.
anyway.
You
And
can't get value.
if I can see a flop cheaply with a hand like that, and I can just see if I'm
It's
gonna.
not even if I can see a flop cheaply and blah blah blah. That's like regurgitated, stuff they send out in full tilt emails. Um, pause the tape for a second, by the way.
Okay.
And this is actually an interesting point. So we know that when we have like a hand that we can get value for, we raise and get value, right? We
Hmm.
know that when we have a hand that has no equity really, we either have to raise it as a bluff or fold it in general against like good players. But like with a hand that's against, when we're depolarized against bad players, like we would always fold some garbage hand like, do seven, right?
Hmm.
But think about post flop, like if you flop a flush draw in position and somebody bets, you look at your hand and you're like, I have medium value here. I can't raise for value, but my hand does have value to play with, right? So you call
Hmm.
with these things. There's a process that we go through post flop to decide if we're going to like call a bet as opposed to raise or fold it, right?
Yeah.
It's the same process pre flop. You say, can I raise my 4-6 shooter for value? Nope. Does it have? Should I fold it? I mean, it's kind of nice. Does it have enough value to play? Yeah. So you call. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
calling has the
Yeah.
benefit too of keeping stacks deep with a hand that generally likes stacks deep.
Hmm.
And limping is something that's okay. It's okay to do it. You just have to go through the same process. I mean, when someone says limping is not okay, that's the same thing as saying like calling post flops not okay. You know what I mean? Like if somebody
Yeah.
bets and you have a flush draw, you can't call because limping is bad. It's dumb. It's dumb. You can. You just have to know that you can't get value from it otherwise. And in general, the reason why we raise is because it's so easy to get value. People call and fold a lot, so it's just better. Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, not to, um. So okay, so I get three bet
Hmm.
here, and um, and we talked about when we can call in
Hmm.
position with
Hmm.
pairs, and against someone who's super aggressive, um, I I wasn't sure. I wasn't exactly sure what I should do here.
I think calling here is fine. If I had pocket nines, given what's already gone on,
Hmm.
I would probably four bet and call a shove pretty
Okay.
happily, actually. Because I would
Okay.
expect a decent part of his shoving range to be ace X's, two big cards, and smaller pairs than me,
Okay.
right? Because I think he is
Yeah.
really reasonably likely that he would take a three bet, five bet line with something like pocket fives or pocket eights or pocket whatever, right?
Hmm.
Sevens I feel like are getting down like maybe just around the border of too small to do that well. You know what I'm
Okay.
saying? I think nines are probably good. Eights is sort of like sevens. I would probably lean towards calling, right?
Okay.
But now we're just gonna have to be aware of the. Well, first of all, we think this guy's probably a pretty decent player,
Hmm.
um, which means that most likely in this situation, he's knows about three betting out of position, and he's probably not polarized, right?
Right. Right.
Which
Right.
means that if there's a lot of big cards, he probably smashes this, and if there's not a lot of big cards, he doesn't, right? Which
Yeah.
is so. What do you know? So like, if he bet here, I would just fold every time. The fact that he checks is a really interesting thing, right? So what I would do here if I were you is because if you can pause the tape again here, it's just kind of good. Um,
Yeah.
the So this is really interesting. So he checks, which is a weird spot because we would expect if he was depolarized, this smashes him. This
Right.
is like incredible for him. So there's only one of two things that's going on. Either we were wrong and he is not polarized, or he's not depolarized, he is polarized, right? And he looks at this type of thing like he's got 8-6 suited, and he's like, oh boy, right? Um,
Yeah.
which sort of ties into the fact that like if he thinks you're good, then he would think that you would be playing a lot of hands that would smash this, right?
Mhm.
So either he is polarized, which is incredible to know, or he has a hand like pocket queens or ace jack that hit this flop and is now like trying to take a check call pot control type line. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah,
So
definitely.
what I would do here is this is oh my god, Andrew's about to tell people to bet for information. I'm about to bet for information here. But call it like a thin bluff, right?
Yeah.
I would bet very not very big. I would bet maybe somewhere between 15 and 20 seems like the right size. Probably closer to
Okay.
the 15 side. Do you see what I'm
Okay.
saying?
'Cause yeah, definitely. And actually, I feel really proud of myself because all the things that you just said is what I was thinking. And um just 'cause I mean, he could have flopped like huge, like ace queen of diamonds and wants to check, or he could definitely be doing it with like 8-6 suited like you said, but so um I don't think that I bet that small though.
I mean, just have to think about like, hold on, like this is let's pause for a second because this is like bet sizing thing that's pretty important. Um, you have to think about what it is that you're trying
Oops.
to get to fold if you're going to bluff someone,
Yeah.
right? And here,
Mhm.
clearly, if he had a hand that has some value to it, something like ace 10,
Mhm.
he's never checking planning on folding this flop, no matter how big we bet. Maybe if we jammed, he would fold. You know what I mean? But he's not gonna
Yeah.
check fold to a 26, and he's not check fold to a 15 or whatever, right? If
Mhm.
he's got
Mhm.
8-6 suited, he's check fold into anything. So in theory, you might be able to say like, hell, we could probably min bet this and accomplish what we want. Now the problem is that he's not going to fold some stuff to a min bet, so we have to like do it reasonably big, at least big enough to represent that we might have some kind of a hand.
Yeah.
But I think that sort of like 15 mark is about right for this.
Okay.
Because we're not going to get him to fold. It's the same problem we had before. Like right now, you're betting 26 because that looks scarier. But this people don't really respond to what looks scarier. They respond to what they have
Yeah, yeah.
and their sort of basic plan they're going into. I think the three bet on the right is fine. But so anyway, so what's really important here is we need to. I would make a note after this hand if he folds. You know what I mean?
Okay.
Because if he
Yeah.
folds, that tells us a ton about what kinds of hands he's three betting.
Mhm.
Because somehow they missed the King Jack 10 board. you know.
Yeah.
And by the way, that starts to inform the way that we're going to play against him. So he check calls, which is actually like we kind of expected that might happen. Which
Mhm.
is why we should bet smaller. Also, it's like sort of we see ourselves here. And then now we should give up. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? Because now it's just he probably has a hand like pocket queens, and he's going to talk himself into calling down.
Mhm.
um, he might even have a really strong hand that he's trying to trap with. But so we're going to find out a lot here. We check, and he checks, and we check, and he's got ace jack or ace 10 or something like that. And the only real thing that we dislike about this, see, that's exactly what I'm talking about. You know what I mean? He's three betting big hands like we expected,
Mhm.
right? Um, and so the only thing that we should fix about that hand is to bet smaller on the flop. And I probably would still make a note about this because now, by the way, now in the future, I wouldn't bet that. You know what I mean?
Right.
Because now that we know that he's three betting like the king nine suited type of hand, it's just too likely that when he checks, he's check calling with some hand like that.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? So now we'll just say thanks, and we'll just thank you for never having to put us to a question ever, and be happy that we know exactly what he has and just be done. But I think the first time against somebody, that's like this is a totally fine spot for us to, um, do some experimenting. Y'all
Okay.
heard it here.
So
Bet for information.
so okay, so against a decent player who's three betting out of the blinds with a depolarized
Hmm.
range. So um then should my like calling range change? Because a lot of times we're like, okay, so we can call with big cards, but if he's like three betting with big cards, I mean,
Well, so here's the
should I
deal.
be
So if
four
he's
betting
three
more?
betting with big cards, good, good, good. You have two options, right? You
Mm-hmm.
can start four betting with a polarized range, which is a great way of dealing with that
Okay.
because it's a really tough boat for him with King Nine there to face four bet. Um, or uh, you can play relatively tightly to his three bets. You know what I mean? The problem with
Okay.
big cards is that there's not that many of them. That might not be a bad spot to double barrel
Okay.
and just fold to a raise. You know what I mean? It's going to be incredibly hard to get money in if you check call the turn and you hit on the river.
Mm-hmm.
Um, unless he could have a straight or something like that, and so you'd probably be able to check raise, and there's a decent chance that he calls. But even then, like it's just too likely that, um, uh, eh, I mean, you could check call. Actually, I guess check calling is okay. Check calling is okay, but I think betting is probably better, just because. Uh, Actually, this is interesting.
Well, because I thought what I was thinking was that he okay, so he calls that flop and like he'd be calling with a lot of hands that likes to
Hmm.
seven, and if he did have a really strong hand or nailed the seven or not the seven, but like was gonna have a hand that he is gonna go with, I didn't want to like blow myself off the hand by bet and having to fold.
I actually think you're right. I think check calling is better. Um, I think like the only thing we get him to fold are things that we have beat already on the turn. Something
Mm-hmm.
like a random float, which I think there's actually a fair amount of on this type of board. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but I think yeah, I think you're right. Like it's worse for us to bet and fold to a raise than it is for us to check call. And I think the more I was talking about it, like talking myself through it, I feel like we do get paid off a ton when we hit. Just because it's too likely, it looks like we have the ace nine or the pocket jacks or something like that. You know what I mean? And so if we check and the river card comes the three of diamonds, and we check again, like I think he's going to bet any. Not only is he going to bet any straight, but he'll probably bet two pairs and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So I think I like actually the way you played it better. So that's good. So
All
twos here
right.
is kind of interesting spot. What did you decide to do?
I decided to just call.
All right, so pause for a second because that has some ramifications. So before we say
Okay.
just move on to it, let's hear why.
Um, I didn't, I guess I didn't really have a really, really good reason other
That's
than,
probably not good.
yeah, I know. Um, because obviously it's not like there's a fish in the blind or anything who I'd want to call
Hmm.
to or anything. Um, I, yeah, it's bad. When I don't know what to do, I just take the more passive route, I guess.
Well, I
But,
suppose better that than like jamming all in with like 9-3 off. But no, you're right. In this case, we sort of would like look for we have what's one of those. This reason why this spot confuses people so much is because all of the options seem about equal in value. You know what I mean? Like you look
yeah.
at it and you're like, well, I could fold this and that would be okay, or I could call with it and that would be okay, or I could raise. Uh oh, and it's like what am I? How am I supposed to choose between three relatively equal seeming, generally not that good options?
Hmm.
Um, and the truth is that we actually can take a process and move through them. So the first thing I would say is, well, should we fold? The answer would be like, well, we have a pocket pair, and pocket pairs are the most profitable thing in the game, so probably not, right?
Hmm.
I would say number two, should we call? And you'd say, well, there's a super aggressive guy behind, so it wouldn't be a great idea to call and hope that he calls. The only real option we might think about doing would be to call and hope that he raises so we could back raise, right?
Mm-hmm.
Re-raise with our deuces. But given that we think that his 5-bet jamming range is pretty wide and includes like all pairs, like we talked about before,
Mm-hmm.
not great for deuces. You know what I mean? Maybe
Yeah.
not quite good enough to do that with. So then we say, well, let's say what about raising? And we say, well, okay, if we raise, we force out this guy to our left, which is
Mm-hmm.
nice because he wasn't going to be a lot of fun to play with anyway. And we end up one-on-one with this Alpha Rich guy. Well, then this comes down to then a couple things. Number one, Alpha Rich is probably opening the button so wide as a regular on the button that we could, in theory, 3-bet any 2 cards without history against him, right? So
Okay.
just by itself, already re-raising is starting to win. You know what I mean?
Okay. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Def
because we can say, all right, well, just 3-betting with junk is probably close to plus EV because he folds a ton because he's raising like 10-3 off and stuff.
okay.
Um, then we say, well, if we re-raise, if he 4-bets us, we actually have a decent hand that we might be able to jam with because it's a pair and pairs are good. And he's probably not 4-betting pocket fives. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Or if he calls, we have a hand that can flop a set and that's good too. Like we'll be able to play fine if he calls. So we end
Okay.
up in a spot where it's like, if I were to rank them, I would say it's probably re-raising is by far the best, followed by calling, which is okay, followed by folding, which is like okay too, but slightly worse than calling. You
Mm-hmm.
dig?
Okay. Yeah. 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 Definitely.
Um, yeah, we just want to try to get ourselves away in general from calling in the small blind when there's a regular in the big blind.
Yeah. That definitely makes sense.
Um, I've heard the theory to never do it before, and it's not an awful theory. Um, it's not perfect by any means, but rarely are any poker theories perfect. Okay.
Okay. Okay. So wait. I know we talked about this earlier, um I remember doing it in a video before where I check raised a hand with no equity
Mm-hmm.
and pot
Mm-hmm.
equity, and that's what I did here. But I
See how you save this one.
well, I'm not. I mean, it's still probably a bad play, but in my head, I was thinking that um this is a flop that if I was on the button I raised, I would see bet all the
Mhm.
time. And um since 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 that's the case, if I check raised, and not just that, but that he's a
Mhm.
regular, and I don't want to always be check raising when I either have like a draw um or a made hand, and I don't even know if I would
Mm,
like always.
okay. Don't know
Well,
about that
okay.
so far, but keep going.
Man, I was all prepared for this moment too, because I remember that this was gonna come up, but I just thought that, I mean, I was gonna give up, obviously, the debacle that happened last time when I check raised a hand with no equity, and then I tried to barrel the turn too. But if it didn't work, I was gonna give up. But I just thought it'd be a good spot to just see how he reacted, and
Okay, so your reason for check raising here is essentially a carryover from the logic I just used for a reason to 3-bet pre, which is he has so much junk that just bricks out that like I could probably check raise this with any 2 cards and get him to fold like just about enough to be profitable, right? Um,
yeah,
which in this sense is basically what you have because pocket deuces are about as good as any 2 cards here.
yeah.
Sorry if you guys can hear that there's a massive rainstorm going on back home in Portland. Welcome back, right? So sorry if you can hear just like crazy rain. But anyway, uh, keep the tape paused for a second because I got a little bit to say about this. Sorry. Uh, so so in that sense, like, is check raising here like really bad with any 2 cards? Like, no, probably not. Versus the button who's got a super wide range, etc., etc., right? Um, but there's some few things that I have a problem with. You say, oh, I don't want to be check raising only when I have good equity or a made hand. Well, like, we think he's going to call a lot. You know what I mean? His most likely action, if, other than folding, is calling.
Yeah,
Which means that if he's calling a lot, then that's exactly what we want to be check raising with. The problem
yeah,
here, though, is look at this. Like, list hands for me that you have that could check raise here that could be good.
Uh,
Give me some
like
hands.
like ace jack,
But
jack
really, but
ten.
you're probably three-betting those hands.
Yeah,
Like
true.
really, when it comes down to it, you're looking at pocket fours and pocket fives and a whole lot of nothing,
Yeah,
right? And I told you that
yeah.
sets are hard to make, which is true, and it's also not a revolutionary theory because most people know that. So you're check raising here in a spot where it's like, if he folds, it's because he has nothing, and that's fine. Like, but in that case, like, it didn't really matter what we had. If he calls, we're
Mhm.
owned. Um, this is another reason why it might be a better idea to three bet this because pocket deuces like don't have like phenomenal value calling preflop out of position because essentially you only can flop a set, otherwise you have to fold them.
Yeah.
Um, but I mean, it's not so bad. We make so much money when we flop a set that it's not so bad whatever you do to play pocket deuces. But to at least like see a flop with them. But like it is kind of dangerous to get ourselves involved in these spots where it's like, oh, I'm bluffing without equity because he has so much air. Someone has to have a lot of air in order to in order to for you to bluff without equity.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Or they have to
Mhm.
never call, right?
Mhm.
If we three
Mhm.
bet here and his plan is to four bet whatever he has, then I feel much better about. Or we check raise and his plan is to three bet rather. I feel much better about the check raise. However, I highly doubt his plan is to three bet this flop with anything.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And in fact, it's so unlikely that if I check raise here and he three bet, I would probably come over the top because it's so unlikely he has anything but air.
Yeah.
So let's see what happens.
I also think, I mean, it's just so much better to play a hand where, like, if I did three bet and then I just can see bet the flop without, and then without having to make this like weird like check raise with twos because I don't want to
Yeah, well,
be.
it's like playing three bet pots is actually generally much easier than playing non three bet pots. Your options are ultra simple. You can either
Mhm.
c bet or you can give up, and that's it.
Mhm.
There's all there is to it, you know. And if you c bet and get
Yeah.
called, you know what to do. If you
Yeah.
check and he bets, you know what to do. It's like
Mhm.
there's because there's less money behind. Positions mean less, which means that games play basically as though everyone was just face up. Which is why it's like a lot easier. No, the fact that he folded to a check raise doesn't mean that like check raising him with anything is good. It just means that like we should be still check raising him with a lot of stuff is good. You know what I mean? He has a ton of air. He has a ton of air. You know what I mean? He is c-betting that hand every time. So yes, our plan should be being to be really aggressive against him. But I would rather have the ace three suited there where I have a gutter and an over or something like that. You know what I mean?
Mhm. Yeah.
Uh, because we really can't continue um, if we get called ever.
Yeah. For sure.
This is so close to being a call with the king high. Um, I would probably still fold though. Did you call?
No, but I thought about it.
Good. That's great. That's exactly what I want to hear. Everyone out there, this is a great way to impress your coaches or people who are actually good at poker that you're talking to. Like before you make a choice, think about everything. Like I have king high here, but I mean, shit. I played against Donnie heads up in the Aussie Millions thing, which is actually supposedly being televised in June or something. Um, and I don't think that me and Donnie matches because that was the round before the money. But Donnie picked me off with like queen high because I was bluffing too. I had like seven high, I missed straight draw. But it's one of those things where it's like he could have looked at his hand and see it was queen high. It wasn't even like an ace king board. It was like an ace something board. Like king high
Mhm.
would have beaten him, for example. But he thinks about everything. Or there's another hand I played
Yeah.
against him, which I should actually post and talk about, which is tremendously interesting. Where I check raised all in on the turn pretty deep with a big draw, and I on an ace high board, and I expected him to have a hand like ace king for top pair and when he tanked about it, right? And
Mhm.
he tanked forever, and then he showed his hand before he made a choice, and he showed a uh, a bigger draw, and he'd
Oh,
been tanking forever with just some big draw, getting terrible odds if I have a made hand.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Just because he thought it was so likely, given the way the hand played out, that I also had a worse draw, that he like was seriously in the tank. And first of all, I was terrified because I was like, I can't believe he's about to call me off with king high right now, when I have five high. Um, and and but the point is like you really should consider all things. Doesn't mean you should be
Yeah.
talked into all things, but you should consider it because that king high there that you thought about was relatively close to a call. Not quite
Mhm.
there, but relatively close.
Gotcha. Um, well, what would have made it closer to a call? Like
Um,
what specific?
if you had king queen instead of king 10,
Mhm.
if the value of your hand was slightly better, basically, like if you had like ace high, like
Yeah.
if you didn't lose to ace high, essentially.
Right, right, right.
Uh,
Like a ace high flush draw he could have
yeah,
had,
something
or
like that. You know what I mean? If
yeah.
the board was slightly more ragged, I think it was like 8-7. I forget exactly what it was. But it just was like too likely he could be betting like an 8 or a 7. Sometimes you come across a board where the board's like, 8-3-3. The turn card's like a 2, and the river card's like a 4. You know what I mean? And
Mhm.
they're like all the draws
Mhm.
miss. Like then it's like he could really only be betting an 8, or he's really only betting an 8 there, which is like more likely than an 8 or a 7, or less likely rather. So
Mhm.
then it's like better to call in those spots. Like you know how to evaluate hand reading. Like what could he have that's beating me that's betting, relative to what does he have that doesn't beat me that's betting. But it's I don't know. It's just like on the underside, not quite being a call, but it's just something to think about. I mean, it's not like it wouldn't be a good call, but like if we had a better hand, it would be. You know, if we had
Yeah.
ace 10 there,
Yeah.
it's probably a pretty easy call.
Mhm.
You know?
Yeah. That makes sense. Well, I paused the tape because I wanted to ask you about this
Sure.
hand. So I just raised a six pre-flop. Swipesville called
Uh-huh.
me on the button and leader called.
Uh-huh.
I just see bet the flop, like two-thirds pot, and he called, leader folded, and then the turn I bet three quarter, 30 into 40.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and this is the river. And obviously I can bet for value because it can definitely get worse to call me. So what, I mean, with our stack sizes, they seemed kind of weird or awkward, so I
Sure.
didn't know like
Sure.
what would be a good bet size.
This hand actually occurs to me that you have two definite options.
Hmm.
You can either bet or you can check fold.
Oh,
Okay.
okay.
Um, Check calling is no good here. When we bet really big on the turn, it's relatively likely that he has a hand, and when he flats, he has one of two
Hmm.
types of hands. Or okay, let me rephrase it. He has one of three types of hands. Okay, let's see if you can guess what those three types of hands are.
Um, like a set or a draw or an overpair.
Essentially, yeah. He either has a set that's got the hand on lock.
Hmm.
He has a draw that's hoping to spike, probably a spade, right? Or he has a hand that's like, ace seven or pocket eights or pocket tens or something like that, that is thinks it's best and thinks you're bluffing a lot or whatever, right?
Yeah,
So in this case, you'd say, oh, can I get value? Well, yeah, you could probably get some value from those hands, although they may fold sometimes as well.
right.
Um, Clearly, if we bet and take a shove, we have to fold, right?
Hmm.
So in this case, actually, I'm inclined to think that check folding is a better play against a regular.
Yeah,
Just because there's not as many things that we beat relative to things that beat us, especially when you consider the fact that he might fold a hand like pocket eights or like pocket tens if we bomb this river.
yeah.
You know what? The other option to think about would be to bet small and call a raise if he turns like those hands into a bluff. But even
Mhm.
then, I think that doesn't happen often enough at 1-2 to justify it.
Mhm.
So I would actually think that like betting or check folding here is probably slightly better than betting, and if I was betting, I would bet something like uh 50.
Okay.
Now, keep in mind, this is a really like that's probably like a very unusual advice. That sort of the standard advice here would be, oh, fire value bet. You know what I mean? And so
Yeah.
like I think that it's sort of like very common to feel like value betting here is the best play. But I think really, um, what types of hands does he show up with that if we check he bets the river that we beat? You know what I mean?
Yeah. No,
And
it
and
all.
how many hands
Yeah.
does he have that call relative to how many hands that does he have that beat us? So I think this is a good spot for us to check fold, but betting can't be that far behind.
Um.
So let's see what you did.
No. How about we just end the video? No, I'm just kidding. Okay.
It's okay.
Um, it's like it's like uh I I thought about all these. Okay, I'll admit I didn't think about
Well, you're in value betting mode, which is
check
which is
folding.
easy, which is easy to get used to when you're playing smaller stakes. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
If you're at smaller stakes, this is not no question. You know what I mean? This is just like, yeah, you probably played it perfectly if you're at 50 cent $1 or especially 25 cent 50 cent, right? But you're not.
Yeah.
You're up against a guy who's probably reasonably good. He's been super aggressive against you. He's shown like a lot of, skill. Most likely he's timing down here with like the pocket sevens and is like about to jam. Um and now we are totally lost and I assume we fold, but maybe we call because we're tilted.
Yeah, I called
And
because I'm
and we get
stupid.
shown the flush, right? But you
Yeah.
see, you see what my point is there. Like what types of hands on the turn,
No, yeah,
you
it
know,
it totally makes
yeah.
sense for
And
sure.
so I think it's just like it's one of those spots that sucks because A, we have two queens and they're pretty. Um,
I know, but I really have worked hard to like get over that, to be like
well,
with my
to a certain
absolutely
point,
hands
you
face.
don't want to get over it too much because queens win so often that when people are like good at bluffing, it kind of gets back down to this simple like, oh, queens win a lot, and he could be bluffing, so right, I'll just call. But I think
But in that spot, he's never bluffing.
yeah, I don't think he's bluffing. I think that we have to fold once we bet, right?
Yeah.
But I think that in general, we just have to remember, like, it gets really difficult to get fully into to two things, fully into like relative value mode, where we're like, oh, like that's not a good board for us. Like I remember seeing a hand once where someone had pocket aces and it got to a four-way pot and the flop was 9-8-7.
Mhm.
And someone said the guy was out of position. They said, "What should I do? How much should I bet?" And Cole South, it was just like, "You should check fold." And I was like, "But we have," in my mind, I was like, "But we have two aces. How could we check fold the flop with two aces?" But it's like it's the same basic idea, which is, oh, it's lame, but we like two queens there on that river card are not great,
Yeah.
and so I think that like, and I didn't know the results of that hand before I saw it, but it's just like one of those spots where the number of hands that now beat us on that river is probably greater than the number of hands that don't beat us and call.
Mhm.
You know, but keep
Mhm.
in mind this is a spot like I wouldn't feel super discouraged about that. Like I wouldn't beat yourself up for it. Um, because coming from a smaller stakes game, this idea of I'm just going to keep on value betting and value betting and value betting, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, um, is good. That's what you've basically been trained to do, and that's you've been winning with.
Mhm.
And people, she has been winning. She's already up to 50 cent $1 on her own money these days. So, like, and that's not even including the fact that I owe her some. Ooh. um, but no, it's difficult to readjust when you move up in stakes, where you start to say, well, this person is a little bit better. And so now I need to actually give them some credit for being able to make a fold. You know,
Mhm.
and that changes
Mhm.
things. So now this time I think this is an easy
Definitely.
call, and we'll lose a lot of the time, but that should be okay.
Yeah. Yeah, it was one of those where I wanted to just see what if
I
he's
mean, he's a fish.
strong
He could have
strong
ace X
suited.
here for sure, but he could also have, the queen eight, right? Like, doesn't make a
Yeah.
lot of sense, and that's okay. The truth is that we will call sometime and lose to an eight, but we need to be right one in five to break even. Or excuse me,
Mhm.
yeah, one in five. No, wait, I think I'm
Well,
backwards. But anyway, yeah, we're gonna win there, way higher than 20%. So
yeah.
easy spot to call.
Yeah, I raised him on the flop because he bet min into me, and I just wanted to see if he was like leading
Yeah,
weak and was
that's
gonna
yeah, that's
fold.
fine. I think you play the hand just great. Actually, perfectly, I would say.
And then like flops like that are always kind of like I never really know if I should just check fold. Well, because if obviously if the four was like an eight or something closer, then I it wouldn't be a great spot to see bet. But with a queen jack, is that
I mean, you could either check fold, which actually is probably a decent line, given
hmm
that there's not very many hands that have equity against you that are going to fold the flop to a bet anyway.
yeah.
Um, you could bet, which isn't that bad, given that there are some hands that do have equity that you could get to fold, the ace X and stuff like that. Um, but I think it's probably reasonably close between check folding and betting.
hmm
Um, I think check calling is probably bad because I think that number one, a lot of hands do have equity against us, and then number two, like a lot of players will read that check on the flop to basically mean like I have a hand like pocket nines, and I'm planning on
Yeah.
check calling down, which is what I do whenever somebody checks against me. I'm like, oh, interesting. You're not folding at any point in this hand. Um, but or if I know that they do fold, then I'll take that into consideration. But I would say in general, like probably betting and check folding are your two best options, and it's not a big deal which one you choose. I think betting's probably okay. But against a regular, especially one who doesn't love to fold, I think check folding's fine. You know,
Yeah.
I mean the
For
real
sure.
thing that's going to frustrate us about playing against this guy on the left is, uh, we're going to need to pick up some kind of hand that stays good, that doesn't get sucked out on to take his money. You know what I mean? And so like that's
hmm
why like it's hard to fold queens against a guy like that because he's so in our face all the time that like we have queens though. You know what I mean? Um,
Yeah.
but the guy is dying to give us his money. He's splashing around a lot, and that's great for us. It's great for the
hmm
game. Someone splashes around a ton. Um, but uh, but I think that we're most likely to stack this guy in the type of situation where like we get nines in pre against his sixes, which is great for us, obviously. But we shouldn't necessarily be like making huge call downs in spots where he's just too likely to be value betting us. You know what I mean? Like we can't really
Yeah.
check call there. Betting is okay, but he doesn't love to fold. I think I would probably just check fold just about everything with no equity, but still like remember, equity is great when the other guy doesn't fold. And look at this guy, he
hmm
doesn't fold. Oh, and he's running so good too. That is gross. He's running so good right now. Everyone who's watching, just remember, everyone runs good sometimes. If you're on a downswing, just remember, if you keep playing long enough, you will make a lot of money just in time for you to turn around and lose it all back. You know, it's uh,
Yeah.
it's it's all good. It's all good. Well, I think we're almost out of time. You said there was a hand
Yeah.
you wanted me to see. Which one was it?
That was
The
it.
Queens
That
one?
was it. Yeah.
Um, I mean, that's just a spot. The only part about that Queen's hand that I think is really troubling is the call after he shoves the river.
Yeah, for sure.
That's
For
tilt.
sure. hmm
You know what I mean? At no point in that did you actually go through a process of being like, what does he have? You're like, you're like, oh my god, I can't believe I'm about to call and lose it all. Oh, I lost it all. Like, like, yeah, of course you did. Um, but
Uh,
that's the only part about that hand that's really disturbing.
yeah.
Um,
Yeah, yeah.
and we need to be able to fold the river. We have to be able to fold the river. We're married right there. We don't need to get married. Um,
absolutely, for
Well, you're
sure.
actually getting married, so you should get married, but like don't
To the
yeah,
hands.
not to get married to your
Thanks.
hands. Think about what Andrew would say. That's her fiance's name. Andrew would not like it if you knew you were getting married behind his back. Um, but like but no, that's the only part about the hand that really disturbs me. As we said, going for a value bet there isn't the worst thing in the world.
Hmm.
You know what I mean? But it's just not better than check folding.
Right.
And it's probably definitely it's way better than or it's way worse than check folding if you can't fold to a raise. But that's
Yeah,
actually
absolutely.
some bullshit. Well, I went the whole hour without cursing, and then I drop it now. Damn, I did it again. Um, the the only part that's kind of like some bad logic, some bad reasoning. People say, well, I don't think I shouldn't call pre-flop because I do such a bad job, playing post-flop. You know, no, if it's a right spot to call pre-flop, then you should call and deal with it post-flop as you go. Don't be
Hmm.
afraid to play something later because you don't trust yourself. Like, trust yourself. Know
Yeah.
what to do. You know?
Yeah.
If you're like, oh, it's not like I'm betting because I want to see if he's going to raise or call or fold. You're betting because that's a good spot to value bet. You're folding because
Hmm.
he's raising. It's
Hmm.
like you know what to do. It's not that big of a deal. Hopefully we stack this leader guy now. Ooh, no, you're gonna call. You're gonna call. Don't call.
Well, I was
Why would you not raise
thinking,
for value here? Oh my god. Oh, that hurts me inside.
I just thought that he had, like, if he had a hand he was going to call with on the turn, that I could still get the rest of it by the river because he didn't have that much.
But what
And I
about all
thought
the
there was,
draws? You could have so many draws. You're never folding a draw on the turn.
that's true.
You're
Yeah,
never
you're
folding
right.
anything on the turn. Why would you ever wait to get value against a bad guy?
I just thought that there was such a big of a chance that he just really didn't have anything, but
I
that's a,
guess, but he doesn't even need to have anything.
yeah, you're right. You're right.
Yeah,
Because of so many draws.
yeah,
Yeah.
he'll look at his, like 9-10 there offsuit and be like, well, this is it. Whereas if you call, that's exactly what happens. Is you call and then he bricks out on the river, fires out a bet and folds. Whereas
Faults. Yeah.
he's gonna call it off. He's never folding any kind of eight outer or better. Not to mention
Yeah.
any jack, and certainly not any pair of any kind. You know.
Hmm.
So I
Definitely.
think that that's just like we can play tricksy and stuff against good players. You know what I mean? We might be able to say, ooh, if I check back here or I just call, then he's gonna fire with a huge range and he can also catch up and then he'll pay off and all this stuff, right? Against a fish, it's not that complicated. Um, what just happened over here with the sevens? He donked and we raised and he called.
No, he checked. I bet he like made a small, tiny raise, and then I called.
So let me ask you a question. What do you
Yeah.
think a guy does? A guy sitting with half a stack, check raises on a king king three board before you even know that he's going to bet twice the pot on the turn.
What do I think he's check raising with? Well, he raised min into me.
Oh, he's only min
Um,
raised to you. Only min raised to you. Like you bet six and he made it 10 or something like that, or like a
well, I bet four and he made it 10.
oh, um, it's close. I would probably still fold just
Okay.
because it's that
Yeah.
guy, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Maybe you could call and then yeah, I guess I think you play it fine actually. You can call and just fold to the turn. That's okay. Any bigger though, and I
Okay.
think I would fold on
Yeah.
the flop because we're
Yeah.
really, our plan. We think this guy's probably bad passive, and if he's bad passive, then we're totally hosed. If he's bad
Hmm.
aggressive, then we'll find that out another time. You know, good. It's a good
Hmm.
spot to three bet with there a7, but we don't. Um, I would three bet the a7 there. Uh, the
Okay.
fact that he immediately comes out and min raises a pot right after that last hand leads me to start to think he might be bad aggressive. In which case, we
Yeah.
can start getting some value. We could probably get value against a
Yeah.
bad passive guy too. People do weird stuff pre-flop because they want to just see hands, but then they change how they play post.
Yeah.
Okay, well I think that let's like wrap up this series, because this is I think a pretty interesting series to look at, on the whole. Um, I think how would you feel like your game has changed from when we first started to now?
It's completely different, and um, I've learned so much, and it's it's taken a bit to get out of habits that I've had for, 5 years. Um, but I'm really, really excited to see how far I can take it.
Well, so just to give an update, like where did you start? Where were you playing when you started, and where are you playing now? Yeah,
Online,
online.
I was just playing 25, 50 cent, and um, really quickly moved up to, I mean, as far as, I mean, we started the series, like 6 or 7 weeks ago, but the amount of time that I was able to put in, I feel really happy with how long it's taken me to get to 50 cent a dollar.
I mean, it's taken you 6 to 7 weeks to move up a limit. If you can keep that pace, you will be fine. End of the year,
Yeah,
you'll be crushing 25 50s. So, like, no,
obviously. I
I mean,
mean,
if you're moving up every month and a half, it's like, oh, what month is it? Oh, it's June. It's July. Looks like we're playing 2-4. Like, oh, what do you know? It's September 5-10. It's like if you can keep up that pace, that's like a pretty extraordinary pace. I don't know. Take a guess how long it took me to move up from 25 cent or 10 cent 25 cent to 25 cent 50 cent. Just guess.
well, I'm cheating because you already told me that.
Okay, Lane. Well, just tell everyone that in case people don't know.
It was a long freaking time. Like a couple years,
A year and
right?
a half.
Okay.
I played 10 cent 25 cent $25 no limit for a year and a half. Okay. Uh, so to move up in a limit in 6 to 8 weeks, something like that, is is great. I'm not trying to like brag here. I'm trying to say that like to people watching that if you watch, if you really follow what the learning that Kristy's gone through in this series, you'll see that even now this session was pretty great because honestly, with only a couple of exceptions, and really like only one exception, you played very confidently with like good sound reasoning. You know, I would bet if you could play like this, um, in uh all the time at 1-2, you're probably a slight winner right now at 1-2. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
And that's all well and good because you've played 2 sessions at it. You know what I mean? And so this is like the skills that we presented in this series are substantial enough to bring you to a point in online poker where you can actually make a lot of money. And I consider the a lot of money quote beginning at 1-2. If
Hmm.
you're beating 1-2, you can make a lot of money by real world standards.
Yeah.
You know, enough like, oh, let's go get a sick place to live and, you know, in a few months get a nice car. You know,
Hmm.
because
Hmm.
you can make like 5+ grand a month at 1-2 if you're
Hmm.
really grinding. um, and uh, and 5K a month, 60K a year. That's like, did I do that right? I think so. 60K a year is like a pretty decent job. Not a great job, but like a decent job, right? But we've
Hmm.
got great room for growth. If we make it to 2-4, we're looking at 120K a year, and then all of a sudden it's like, hey, now we're starting to live like a champ. So
Yeah.
so yeah, let's see if we can wrap up some of the concepts. What concepts do you think were most important for you to learn in this series?
Um, Mostly just, asking myself if I can bet for value and going through the thought processes, especially when it comes to to bluffing and reading board texture and knowing what good cards, pot equity and fold equity, that was huge to it made a huge difference in my game because a lot of times I'd be like, "Oh, well, I think that this is a good place, a spot to bet. I'm not really sure why, but now I have
Yeah, now
good
now you
good
know.
reason."
And by the way,
Yeah.
whenever you talk to anyone about poker in the future, there's always a mantra you should keep, which is if you can justify something, I'll buy it. Which means
Hmm.
sometimes you'll get really bad players who say something that's incredibly brilliant, and you get great players who use a terrible justification, myself included. Sometimes I'm like, oh, this is clearly a raise because and I'll come up with some bullshit rationalization, and someone will be like, that's dumb, and here's why, and they're right.
Yeah.
Um, all you have to do to play this game is know what you're talking about. if you what you're saying makes sense, it'll work. Simple as that.
Hmm.
Okay, well, I want to say it's been like a real pleasure to do this series with you. It's kind of like a cool series relative to the other ones I've done because like this one I actually really got to know a person, as opposed
Yeah.
to like going through a collection of people's videos and sort of analyzing different people at different times. Um,
Hmm.
and I think that it's really exciting. I hope that I know you're playing in a few World Series events, right? The ladies event and something else, right?
Yeah, I think probably one or maybe two 1Ks.
Okay. Well,
So,
hopefully you take home a bracelet and make me look like the greatest of all time.
oh, that would be so sick.
Oh yeah, I will be at that party, no doubt.
Yeah, and we want a bracelet from you in the 25K shorthanded. Is
I'm
that
not I'm
right?
not sure if I'm planning that yet. I've like I want to, but I've got some commitments now at home that I might
Oh,
mean that I'm only playing in the main. We'll see. We'll see.
okay.
What women do to our lives is disgusting, but I may have to be around home until the main. But
All right. Well, at least you'll be out here for a little bit,
yep,
and we
I will
can
be
do
in
some
Vegas. So if you
preparation.
guys are in Vegas and you see me and Kristy hanging out, which we will be, come and say what's up
Sure.
and tell us
Sure.
how much you disliked our series and what we can do to make it better next time. All right?
Sweet.
Cool. Well, good luck everyone. Thank you for watching. This has been the Coaching Kristy series only on deucescrack.com. I am Andrew Beluga Whale Sideman and that is Kristy Arnett. Take it easy guys. Good luck.
Bye.